No bombs are falling, no protests erupting, no war-stirring tweets. And yet, an economic earthquake is quietly sweeping across the United States, starting from Canada. Millions of tourists have vanished, billions of dollars in exports have evaporated, and states that once thrived thanks to their friendly northern neighbor are now struggling to stay afloat. This isn't a theory. 6 U.S. states are already feeling the blow from a soft boycott. Silent, but eerily precise. And if you think the impact stops at tourism or trade, think again. Florida. When the sun no longer warms the wallet. Florida, the place where the sun never sets. But now, that sun-soaked air is turning cold through the numbers on the balance sheet. You still see the blue beaches, the swaying palm trees, the tall hotels basking under clear skies. But if you step inside, into the hotel lobbies, the beachfront rentals, or the once busy family restaurants in Naples and Fort Lauderdale, what you'll hear is no longer the laughter of tourists, but the hum of ceiling fans in silence, empty chairs and tables, and one big question hanging in everyone's mind: where did the Canadians go? The answer isn't in the flight schedules, but in a rising wave from the north. No official statement, no tariffs or sanctions. Millions of Canadians have simply decided not to come. They stopped booking flights, stopped renting winter homes, and stopped spending money in the state that used to be their second home. The reasons are many: political tensions, trade frustrations, a loss of trust in what America is becoming. But regardless of the cause, the result is clear. Florida's local economy, built on the cash flow of Canadian snowbirds, is trembling. Not everyone understands just how crucial Canada is to Florida, but consider this. More than 3 million Canadians come to this state each year, mostly during winter. They don't just stay a few days like typical tourists. They live for weeks, even months, renting apartments, buying groceries, seeing doctors, playing golf, and spending money like real residents. In dozens of coastal communities, from Sarasota to the heart of Palm Beach, there are rows of empty homes that used to be fully booked from November to March. And when that flow of people stops, a whole domino chain begins to fall. Private rentals lose tenants. Small restaurants no longer earn enough to keep the kitchen open every day. Uber drivers, housekeeping staff, medical technicians, those quiet links that keep the service industry running, start losing shifts, losing income, and losing faith that winter will ever warm the wallet again. At the local government level, things look even darker. Many counties heavily depend on tourism tax, especially from room rentals and tourist shopping, are now facing a budget crisis. With visitor numbers down more than 70%, revenues are no longer enough to sustain public services that were already stretched thin after the pandemic. Several counties have started freezing tourism marketing budgets, canceling infrastructure upgrade plans, and even delaying bond repayments. The scariest part is, this is no longer just a temporary phenomenon. For the first time in decades, vacation property management firms are reporting mass cancellations, not due to a pandemic, but because no one booked in the first place. Golf courses, once a symbol of Florida leisure, are seeing a deep drop in players during peak months. Some have cut maintenance staff. Others are quietly putting themselves up for sale. Even the healthcare industry, rarely thought of when it comes to tourism, is feeling the impact. Florida is a popular destination for elderly Canadians to get checkups or minor procedures during the winter. Now that they're not coming, clinics that specifically served this group have had to reduce their hours, and many have employees taking rotating leaves due to a lack of patience. Florida is no stranger to storms, but this one has no name, no weather alert, and no clear end. It doesn't tear down houses, but it's slowly eating away at the economic pillars of the state. In a quiet, relentless way. If people once said that Florida's sunshine never fades, Then 2025 is asking a new question. What happens when the sun still shines bright, but the wallet grows colder by the day? Arizona. When winter became too quiet. Unlike Florida, where the economy is tied to beaches and ocean sunshine, Arizona offers a different kind of warmth. Dry, high desert, but pleasant enough for millions of Canadians to choose it as their winter haven for generations. In the minds of many Canadians, Arizona is the promised land. No snow, no blizzards, no heavy coats, just RVs cruising through fiery red deserts, cozy winter lodges, and steakhouse dinners with friendly smiles in the middle of the sand. But in the winter of 2025, that warmth is no longer lively. Arizona, once considered Canada's second destination, has entered a strange state. The sun still shines, the sky remains blue, but the RV parks are deserted, restaurants shut their lights early, and entire towns seem to be holding their breath, waiting for someone to arrive. The numbers make it clear. Canadian visitors to Arizona are down more than 70% compared to last year. But behind that figure is a collapsing value chain stretching from Tucson to Yuma, from Glendale to retirement communities in Apache Junction. Places that once thrived on northern winters. The problem isn't just that tourists have disappeared. In Arizona, Canadians aren't merely visitors. They are temporary neighbors, seasonal residents. They rent homes for 3 to 4 months, register for medical services, join golf clubs, and even contribute to local community funds. When they pull back, the financial foundation many small towns rely on begins to shake. In Yuma, one of the highest density snowbird areas in the country, medical centers that used to be booked solid for winter checkups are now reducing their hours. Farmers markets that once buzzed with Canadian customers now stand empty. And most concerning, many small RV park owners, usually family-run businesses, are teetering on the brink of bankruptcy, operating at just 30 to 40% of last year's booking capacity. The disappearance of Canadians is also forcing many businesses to ask a fundamental question: can we survive without winter? For local restaurants, whose winter earnings are crucial to enduring the brutal summer, the answer is increasingly leaning toward no. And as small businesses are pushed into a reactive position, Arizona's public financial system is also starting to crack. Nearly 10% of the state's economy depends directly on tourism and related services. Each time visitor numbers plunge, tax revenues shrink. This threatens social programs, public health initiatives, and infrastructure development plans in rural areas, where budgets have few alternatives. It doesn't stop there. The impact has spread into the real estate market. In recent years, Arizona has become a hot spot for investment, attracting not only tourists but also real estate buyers from Canada. But with this quiet boycott taking hold, a wave of vacation property deals has been canceled. Rental rates are falling, and new resort developments are beginning to freeze, stalled mid-construction. More dangerously, trust, that invisible but essential asset, is being eroded. There is no longer any certainty that those who've come to Arizona for the past 10 years will return next winter. And if this absence stretches into another 1 or 2 winters, the damage will no longer be called a tourism decline. It will be a structural break. The state's tourism boards have launched emergency promotional campaigns aimed at alternative markets like California, Texas, or even domestic U.S. travelers. But in today's volatile economy, that effort feels like fighting a wildfire with a spray bottle. Well-intentioned, but far too small for the flames spreading. For Arizona, once proudly known as the destination of winters without coats, this year's winter brings more than sunshine. It carries the silence of loss, the chill of financial withdrawal, and a question no one dares to answer out loud. If Canadians never come back, who will Arizona be in the American economy? Indiana. When the machines stopped singing, If Florida is where the sunlight is dimmed by empty wallets, and Arizona is the dry sun waiting for people to return, then Indiana is the industrial heart of America, once beating powerfully with the sounds of machinery, trucks, and shift workers, now slowing down, not because of a lack of skill or productivity, but because of a silence at the northern border. Indiana has no ocean, nor does it have picture-perfect snow to attract foreign tourists. But Indiana has something Canada once needed deeply: large-scale manufacturing. From auto parts, pharmaceuticals, and steel to aerospace equipment, each year, billions of dollars in goods leave the red brick factories of Fort Wayne, Terre Haute, Elkhart, then head north via rail, road, and water. For the past 2 decades, Canada has not just been a trade partner, it has been the biggest customer. And then, in 2025, everything began to slip. Not because of a specific event. There was no official breakup, but orders began to decline. Contracts once renewed regularly suddenly came under review. Some longtime partners in Ontario began looking to Europe. Some importers in Quebec turned to domestic or Mexican supply chains. Indiana wasn't declared war upon, it was simply, deliberately forgotten. In manufacturing, a delayed contract doesn't just mean lost money, it means lost rhythm. When Canadian orders shrink, factories don't just produce less, they lose stability, the lifeline of an economy built on precision output. In Terre Haute, an auto parts plant was forced to lay off a third of its night shift. In Elkhart, many small machining shops, reliant on just 1 or 2 Canadian customers, are shifting into hibernation mode, hoping things are only temporary. But it no longer seems temporary. The latest figures show that exports from Indiana to Canada dropped by over 9% in just the first quarter of the year. And more worrying is that the value loss came from the highest margin goods. That means it's not just less money, it's losing the best money. The money that feeds hundreds of families, retains engineers, maintains machinery, and pays taxes to counties, schools, and public health systems. Indiana doesn't just live off industry, it lives off the land. It's one of the Midwest's biggest agricultural states, exporting core products to Canada: corn, soybeans, pork, and industrial grains. But this season, central warehouses are holding more than usual because they aren't selling. 2 large farming cooperatives have had to pause warehouse expansion plans due to steep export drops to Canada. Corn prices have dipped slightly. Pork prices held, but logistics costs increased as producers redirected to Mexico, a more expensive, farther, and less certain market. Indiana's biggest problem is its specialization. Once an advantage, now a critical weakness. The state followed all the right economic development advice: focus on key sectors, optimize production, tighten supply chains. But when the biggest northern link starts to loosen, Indiana has little room to maneuver. Local politicians are trying to douse the flames with economic diplomacy, sending delegations to Toronto, increasing contact with Canadian firms, issuing statements that Indiana remains open and ready to cooperate. But the truth is, trust can't be rebuilt with words. When Canadian consumers begin selectively boycotting U.S. goods, importers don't want to be the next target for backlash by sticking with American suppliers, even if the price or quality is better. And that's the most painful truth for Indiana. You didn't do anything wrong, but you're still paying the price. No protests, no slogans, just empty trucks, slowed production lines, and silent workers walking out of the factory gates earlier than usual. Indiana, long known for being resilient, diligent, and low profile, is now facing a bitter paradox. They've done everything right as America's workshop, but might be among the first to shut down if Canadians don't return. And that raises a much bigger question. If your most important customer no longer trusts you, who will take their place? Michigan. When the gears begin to stall. In Michigan, winter isn't just the cold of falling snow. It's something people are used to living with, like the sound of stamping machines in factories, the noise of trains hauling steel from the port, and the glow of nightlights on assembly lines running nonstop. Michigan is the land of people who don't fear the cold, don't mind the grease, and don't back down from challenges. But in 2025, something is making the entire state cold in a different way. Cold from the inside. From the outside, Michigan still looks like one of America's manufacturing pillars. But if you listen more closely, you'll hear something no one wants to hear in an economy built on movement: hesitation. Michigan isn't just Canada's neighbor. They're strategic partners, inseparable. Each year, more than $27 billion worth of goods are exported from Michigan to Canada, mostly cars, auto parts, industrial equipment, rolled steel, and agricultural products. Detroit and Windsor were once described as two halves of the same engine, running in sync, seamlessly, without much need for words. But 2025 brought a slipped rhythm, quiet but profound. As the silent boycott spread from the north, Canadian companies began reassessing their supply chains. Not through loud moves, but through small, consistent choices. Shifting orders, breaking up contracts, choosing other suppliers, just in case. That has left Michigan manufacturers, already struggling with rising labor and material costs, facing the added fear of losing their foothold in their closest and most familiar market. In towns like Port Huron and Sault Ste. Marie, places where Canadians used to come to buy medicine, fill up gas, eat out, or go summer fishing, things are now unusually empty. Souvenir shops that once thrived on Ontario tourists have started closing earlier than usual. Roadside gas stations have seen revenues drop by 30 to 40%. And in northern Michigan's agricultural areas, farm owners have begun reporting a sharp drop in feed orders from Canada, a leading indicator of an income shock in the fall. But the biggest, most obvious impact lies at the economic heart: Detroit. The city once celebrated for its comeback after the 2008 crisis, where the auto industry rose from the rubble, is once again finding itself on the edge. Not because of bankruptcy, but because the very connections that powered its revival are fracturing. Dozens of factories rely on parts from Ontario or ship completed vehicles back to the Canadian market. When orders are paused or delivery schedules shift, the entire assembly line falls into disorder. An engineer at the Dearborn Industrial Complex said it bluntly: "We can't plan long-term production if we have to ask every week whether the other side of the border is placing orders." And more worryingly, many large firms are quietly diversifying their supply chains, moving parts of production south to the U.S. or Mexico to avoid border risk. In the short term, that's a reasonable strategy. But in the long term, it could be the end of Michigan's dominant role in North American manufacturing. The consequences don't stop at the factory. In shareholder meetings, investors are starting to express concern over-reliance on a single trade direction. New construction projects are being put on hold. Many manufacturing tech startups are delaying funding rounds, waiting for a clearer picture of U.S.-Canada trade relations. But that picture is growing more blurred. In smaller towns like Traverse City, Alpena, and Manistee, places that once thrived on summer tourism from Canada, things are even quieter. Boat rental bookings are down as much as 40%. Lakeside cabins remain vacant through holiday weekends. And local business owners are recalculating cash flow, wondering if the next high season will still be high. Michigan has long been proud of its resilience, holding its head high through waves of industrial crises. But this time, the challenge isn't coming from obsolescence. It's coming from a fracture of trust. The trust that our customers will come back, that the border will always stay open, that we will recover together. If Michigan is a major gear in the North American machine, then right now that gear is stalling, waiting for lubrication, waiting for a signal from the other side of the Detroit River. But if the wait lasts too long, people will start looking for a way to replace that gear. And once you've been replaced in the global value chain, it's very hard to return to your original position. Illinois. When the trade bridges start to crack. For those looking down at Chicago from above, where the Chicago River meets Lake Michigan, where skyscrapers still shine bright every night, it's hard to believe Illinois is staggering. But the most dangerous thing in economics isn't a major collapse. It's the small cracks spreading beneath what once seemed like solid concrete. And in 2025, those cracks have started to show. Not because Illinois is weak inside, but because the support from the North is quietly pulling away. On America's export map, Illinois is a pillar. With over $16 billion in goods exported to Canada each year, the state ranks among the top nationwide for cross-border trade volume. It ships heavy machinery from Rockford, electronics from Naperville, processed food from the farming towns in the South. But now, those once steady heartbeat-like orders are skipping beats. In the once bustling industrial zones of Peoria and Decatur, people are seeing train cars sitting longer before being loaded, production lines shifting to power-saving mode, and emails from Canadian partners with the all-too-familiar message, "Order postponed due to market uncertainty." What's more serious is that this isn't just a slow quarter. It's a trend. Importers from Quebec and Ontario no longer view Illinois as the default choice. They're looking for new partners in Europe, South America, and even other U.S. states perceived as less politically risky. It's a quiet shift, needing no slogans, no announcements, but enough to keep thousands of Illinois' middle-class workers up at night. In Bloomington and Springfield, where food packaging and agri-processing plants once ran 3 shifts a day, shipments to Toronto are falling sharply. Not just canned meat or livestock feed, even high-margin products like plant protein and packaged goods for Canadian retail chains are being replaced by closer or non-U.S. suppliers. Rural Illinois, once proud of its cornfields, soybeans, and livestock, isn't staying untouched. Canada has long been a key buyer of processed soy, export corn, and frozen meat from the state's central southern region. But this year, few haven't noticed the decline in truckloads bound for Canada. An agricultural co-op in Quincy even had to shut its bean drying plant a month early due to steep order reductions. And the worrying part is, prices haven't dropped significantly. But the customers just aren't coming back. But Illinois doesn't just produce. It's also a transport hub. The Port of Chicago, the rail lines connected to the Great Lakes and federal highways form the backbone of domestic and international trade. And in the first few months of the year, container volume from Chicago to Canadian cities dropped more than 15%, a figure enough to concern any logistics operator. Warehouses are scaling back. Many truck drivers have had their shifts cut. Stevedores are moving to temporary gigs because Canada isn't calling much anymore. A bigger challenge lies in growing uncertainty. Manufacturing tech companies in the Chicago area, once planning to expand production lines, are now freezing hiring. A food tech startup in Evanston, which had planned to open a Montreal office, just canceled. Not because the product failed, but because no one's sure if the border will remain as open or if trust will remain intact. State politicians have begun urging the federal government to ease bilateral tensions with Canada. But while waiting for top-level talks, at the ground level, small businesses are dying off. Places that survived the 2008 financial crisis, that made it through the COVID-19 pandemic, now can't catch their breath because they lost a customer they once believed was irreplaceable. Illinois used to be a major bridge in U.S.-Canada trade, but now the steel beams of that bridge are cracking, not from floodwater, but because footsteps have stopped crossing. And if no one patches it, if trust isn't rebuilt, that bridge won't collapse outright, but it will break. One section at a time. And when a bridge breaks a step at a time, sometimes the entire city behind it can't move forward anymore. Minnesota. When the currents fall silent beneath the still lake. Minnesota has never been a name that draws attention on the map of crises. No giant auto plants like Detroit, no bustling ports like Chicago, and no crowded beaches like Florida. But that's exactly why this state has long been seen as the quiet strength of the North, an economy as solid as pine trunks, built on the diligence of farmers, the precision of engineers, and the steady trust in long-standing relationships with the neighbor above, Canada. And precisely because of that, the quiet withdrawal of Canadians in 2025 struck Minnesota not with noise, but with disorientation. Minnesota is an export-heavy state, something not many people notice. 1 in 6 workers here is directly or indirectly involved in industries tied to international trade, of which nearly 40% is with Canada. That means, out of every 10 contracts, nearly 4 are tied to customers, importers, or partners up north. And now, almost overnight, many of those contracts have vanished. There was no official statement from the Canadian government, no press conference announcing we're cutting ties, but importers started sending cold emails, plans temporarily suspended. We're reassessing the market, redirecting orders for now. A medical device company in St. Cloud, once a supplier of endoscopes and medical sensors to 6 hospitals in Manitoba, had to lay off 30% of its staff in just 6 weeks because the partner has gone unusually silent. In Duluth, once proudly dubbed the Northern Trade Gateway, with its deep-water port linking the Great Lakes and Canadian provinces, the outlook isn't any brighter. Cargo volume headed to Ontario and Quebec via its shipping lanes dropped nearly 20% in the first quarter, according to data from the Duluth Port Authority. Ships carrying barley, scrap metal, and minerals that once left regularly now sail out sporadically. The port isn't empty, but there are stretches of quiet never seen before between busy seasons. And that's the biggest concern. The absence isn't shocking, but it's unsettling, because it comes with no promise of return. In the central part of the state, hog farmers and soybean growers are gritting their teeth, selling to domestic markets at lower prices because Canadian demand is no longer what it used to be. 2 meat processing plants in Marshall and Worthington have reduced capacity for the 3rd week in a row. Not for lack of pigs, but because there are no longer big buyers to absorb their full output. And in the East, high-end industrial equipment manufacturers in Rochester and Eden Prairie, once the pride of Minnesota's production tech sector, are beginning to scale back expansion plans, as many long-term orders from Canadian clients are put on indefinite hold. Young engineers hired in mid-2024 are now being reassigned to risk analysis departments, something they admit we never thought would happen just months into the job. The state government is still trying to maintain stability. No one is shouting crisis, no mass closures. But what's unfolding is a controlled retreat, businesses cutting slowly, people spending cautiously, and city finance departments starting to plan for lower revenue than expenses in 2025. And the irony is, everything Minnesota is losing didn't come from a war or an internal mistake. It came from an emotional wave across the border, a shift in how Canadians view America, American goods, and who they want to stay committed to long-term. This isn't a crash. No one's declaring bankruptcy en masse. But this is erosion of trust, of cash flow, and of a once solid position on the North American trade map. Minnesota, the land of 10,000 lakes, is now staring into that still water, asking, will the familiar currents ever return? Or is this very calm the most dangerous thing of all? Because an economy can weather a storm, but sometimes it can't survive a winter that's too quiet. When a nod turns into a turned back. Every major crisis begins with small signals, a strange silence on the phone, an order postponed without explanation, an empty chair no one wants to sit in. But for America in 2025, the most frightening thing isn't noise, but the quiet consensus spreading along the northern border. Canadians have chosen to turn away, not with words, but with consumer actions. 6 states have been named, from Florida, which relies on winter tourists, to Arizona, fueled by RVs and golf courses, to manufacturing hubs like Indiana, Michigan, Illinois, and Minnesota. All are going through a nameless recession. Not loud, not collapsing, but thick and persistent, like winter fog settling over every small business's balance sheet. So the final question must be asked, is this just a temporary stall or the beginning of a new order, where Canada is no longer America's loyal trading partner? Let's look at what's truly changing. First, this turnaway isn't coming from politicians, but from ordinary people. Families that used to vacation in the U.S. now choose to stay home. Business people who once signed long-term contracts with American suppliers are now shifting to Europe or Asia, not because of lower prices, but because trust has worn thin. They're not protesting in the streets, not declaring, "We've cut ties." They're simply no longer showing up. Second, this isn't an isolated reaction. From Vancouver to Montreal, from Halifax to Toronto, Canadian media have begun using phrases like replacing the U.S., diversifying supply chains, and self-reliance. Words that once only appeared in policy forums are now part of public consumer consciousness. Everyday Canadians, not just experts, are starting to look at the Made in USA label with hesitation. Third, America has lost an invisible advantage that no budget can buy back: default status. For decades, partnering with the U.S. in travel, trade, or investment was a given for neighboring countries. But in 2025, that assumption has been broken. Canadian businesses no longer feel sure that American partners will be stable, supply chains uninterrupted, or political contexts harmless. A relationship that must be re-evaluated yearly is ultimately not a sustainable one. What's most notable is this: if Canada, a country seen as friendly, stable, civilized, and culturally close to the U.S., is beginning to turn away like this, then other nations watching will understand. A precedent has been set. Boycotting is no longer the weapon of angry mobs. It has become a quiet consumer strategy. Effective, contagious, and most importantly, uncontrollable by law or trade barriers. Canadians don't need to close the border. They just need to stop spending across it. And that, economically, is more terrifying than any sanction. An empty chair at a restaurant in Florida. A vacant golf course in Arizona. A production line cutting shifts in Indiana. A freight car with no recipient in Illinois. A quiet shipping dock in Minnesota. These are the surface-level symptoms of something deeper. A fading trust. America once believed that if there were any country that would never walk away, it would be Canada. But perhaps the mistake wasn't in policy, but in the confidence that friendship is unshakable. The world of 2025 is showing even the kindest neighbor can shut the door if they feel unheard. And if 6 states have already felt the economic sting after just one winter, then America must ask itself, how many more winters like this will pass before we act? Because a silent turnaway can be a wake-up call, or the beginning of a quiet era of decline.